and can't make it tonight, so I get to be the moderator. Sorry about that. Tonight, our debate features the two Republican candidates for Victoria District Attorney, incumbent on my right, Steve Tyler, and challenger, Constance Philly Johnson, on my left. I want to thank both of the candidates for agreeing. Ahead of and then each candidate will get a series of, well, a total of 6 questions. The candidates will get the same question. Each will get 2 minutes to respond to the question, and then there'll be 1 minute time for rebuttal. Mr. Tyler won the toss, will get the first question. After that, the order of the questions will alternate. For opening statements, we're going to allow the incumbent. So we'll start with Mr. Tyler delivering his opening statement.
Thank you, and I thank the advocate in the chamber and all those in attendance. Who am I? I'm the criminal district attorney. I represent you in district court and all lower courts. I represent the commissioners and I advise the commissioners. I am the experienced candidate for criminal district attorney. My opponent has tried, or prosecuted rather, 0 cases. I have prosecuted 108 cases in Victoria County. 94 of them felony cases with a 94% conviction rate. I have 34 murder, attempted murder, or engaging cases. Who am I? With law enforcement, I'm the guy that scattered the gangs here in Victoria. When I took office, Victoria was evaluated as the 9th most dangerous municipality. We're one of the 4 safest in that we have a 10% or higher reduction in crime. It is now at the lowest rate on a The DA's office is to enforce the laws and
Good evening. I'm Constance Philly Johnson, and I'm here in Victoria. I graduated from Victoria High School, Victoria College, and the University of Houston, Victoria, with a degree in education. Region 3. In that capacity, I implemented drug and violence prevention programs in 40 school districts. Graduated top of my class in December 2005 and came right back home to practice criminal law with my dad, George Philly, and one of my sisters, Dina Hardwick. I've also had the distinct pleasure of serving 2 terms as your municipal court judge for the city of Victoria. I want to implement policy turnover, number 1, that better serve your taxpayer dollars and that work together with law enforcement, other agencies, and local treatment providers. I look Victoria County. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Tyler, and again, the same question. 2-part question. County courts of law effective in reducing recidivism with defendants? Should these specialty programs also be used for veterans?
Thank you. First is, before you implement a program, there's 4 things you know. Does it do what you intended to do? And is it effective? Typically tax money as well. And lastly, does the judicial system requires a judge to be objective? Program. The first is reduction in DWI 1s, a 12% reduction in the second-time DWIs, a 42% reduction in third DWIs, and a 33% reduction in homicide resulting from intoxication. My program was to have consequences for those who break the law. My job is to enforce the law and to modify behavior. Typically, you modify behavior by visiting a consequence on the wrongdoer. My job is to vindicate the victims and protect the community, not make defendants comfortable. Lastly, with all specialty courts, you have to be concerned about the objectivity of the judge. The advocate ran a story. I know I was interviewed or given questions on Friday before the story ran, and I provided 2 pages, 2.5 pages in responses. It was much more than a half sentence that was in the newspaper. One of the things that's of particular concern is the objectivity of the court. They drinking program, not having completed it. That would be a violation. Is the court too friendly with the defendant? Objectivity of the court is important in the criminal justice system.
All right, so I'll repeat the question for you. Our special court probation program, such as the DWI program used by both county courts of law, effective in reducing recidivism with defendants, should these specialty programs also be used for veterans, for those who suffer from mental health problems, or for those with drug addiction?
Thank you, Chris. I fully embrace specialty courts. I think they are effective. The research bears that out, and they are an investment of taxpayer dollars. Investing in underlying issues that defendants face to prevent recidivism program. I was a founding member of that court in 2008. I have volunteered my services to that court for the last 10 years, and our judges are not friendly with the probationers. They're tough. Underlying issues to prevent recidivism. I will continue to embrace the DWI court. Our seat at the table, if you will, that Mr. Tyler has not participated in that court since beginning. Exploring the opportunity to initiate other specialty courts. Veterans Court and mental health treatment are absolutely necessary, and I think they're a good.
So each candidate gets time for a 1-minute rebuttal. Go ahead, Mr. Tyler.
He had violations by not being involved or enrolling in a treatment. There was no motion for revocation because there's no violation. Counsel or a license to counsel treatment for addictions. There is something unusual about a person who violates that has no consequences. In the studies she cited, if you go to the Dallas DA's race, who wants to avoid consequences to defendants. They want to make defendants comfortable. Not defendants comfortable.
Mr. Tyler or anyone from his office actually attended DWI court. He had completed all of his group counseling sessions, but had not signed up for his individual sessions. That was an issue that we worked out at DWI court. He scheduled those promptly. It's not about the Mr. Garrett's. It's about the numerous people in our community that group standard, but at the same time need some assistance for addressing the
This time Ms. Johnson gets to start. Mr. Tyler created, we're on a similar topic, Mr. Tyler created a policy of no longer in place. How should the public best determine whether this policy was a success or a failure?
Mr. Tyler has publicly cited his Office of Court Administration numbers as being successful with regard to that policy. His numbers dictate what numbers we're looking at. He files the cases that the OCA reports from. That is not raw data. I've asked 11% increase in first-time DWI offenses. Mr. Tyler's stated goal of that policy was to reduce increase public awareness of DWIs and thereby reduce the level of offense, and that hasn't happened. It was costly. It put an unnecessary burden on departments, and in my humble opinion, was not a success. I think there's a reason for that.
Okay. On page cases to go to trial, this policy is no longer in place. How should the public best determine whether this policy was a success or a failure?
Well, first we need to, and it was for a 2-year period of time. And what was data that's sworn to by the county clerks in the district so that you, the citizens, can see how your courts are working. That data shows reduction in DWI seconds, a 42% reduction in DWI thirds, a 33% reduction in homicides. The year after the policy as the year before. And if it's undue pressure on the courts, first I would submit they should practice law instead of counseling. Out of 80 possible trial settings a year, all the way up to 24. So they went from 10% capacity to 31% capacity. They are not overburdened. In a lot of jurisdictions, county courts of law will hear 3 DWIs a week. A DWI is a day and a half trial. Consequences deter criminal conduct. If a criminal is comfortable, you will get more crime. That is not the purpose of the DA's office. It is to enforce the laws and to protect the community. The data is available to all of you, and that's how it works out. The year before compared to the year after. 700 cases less, and the results that I quoted to you. I might also add, no indication of increased costs. Those which is typically what happens in a DWI, they can order repayment of any indigent defense costs.
All right, we've got 1 minute rebuttal for you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, sir. He has the opportunity to manipulate that data. The raw numbers are taken from arrest numbers. Your police department, sheriff's department, Department of Public Safety troopers arrested in 2015 200 people. That did drop down. But back up at 2017, 206 Mr. Tyler had intended. The deterrent for criminal consequences is only available if people know the consequences. I have anecdotal the new DWI policy entailed, so it couldn't possibly have had the deterrent effect that it was intended.
But I would expect that. She's a DWI defense attorney. It did have deterrent effect. She ought to know. She argued that before every jury panel that she lost a case in. It did deter. You have the numbers. Every arrest doesn't rise to probable cause. You have to actually have a case to move forward. It's not simple. As well as out of the not make criminals comfortable. That's our duty. That's what we're focused on. It had good results, and everybody in the jurisdiction heard about it.
All right, we got next question, and Mr. Tyler gets the question of mental health care. How can we best help residents who suffer from mental illness?
There's really no possible way of answering that in a minute or two. I believe the legislature has been wrangling with that for over a decade, and they meet for a lot longer than we have here. First, it's going to take money. Okay, it's going to take a good bit of money, because what you're looking at is divert them from incarceration to some kind of treatment, and treatment doesn't come cheap. Psychologists and quite a bit different than jails. Now, about a diversion program, but what they use the weaker parts of the system. An arrest and the use of force. They are not trained to magistrate. The arresting officer, the jailers have not noticed people who are mentally ill. We identified them because their mothers, frustrated, came to my office and gave me a good bit more background than I suppose the officers had when they originally made the arrest. And we filed an order or a motion for an order from the magistrate for an immediate evaluation. We have somewhat of a system. To really have a robust system requires the state to fund it and the state to relook at quite a bit of how they handle it. Thank you.
All right. Same question, I'll repeat it. Experts say our jails and prisons are the country's largest provider of mental health care. How can we best help residents who suffer from mental illness?
The state does need to fund it. That's a We have been given funding through the Gulf Bend Community Collaborative. Mr. Tyler has been invited to participate in the formation of that entity to help divert nonviolent offenders from jail, and he has not attended any of those meetings. Again, I mentioned a moment ago that I think specialty courts and being proactive rather than reactive have something better in place. We should embrace what some of the local entities are trying to do to remedy that situation. Jail is not the place for nonviolent people with mental illness, and we need to do a better job to step up and try to think outside the box until we do have the funding available from the national and state resources.
All right, 1 minute rebuttal to Mr. Tyler.
We don't have You have basically a Band-Aid for a sucking chest wound. And anybody who knows the issue and is honest would tell you that. Missed meetings because the Office of the Inspector General was doing an investigation of Gulf Bend. And the first line responders are all peace officers. I was fully informed by board members, Raleigh McCoy, as well as my partners, the chief of police and the sheriff, as to what was going on. I might add, we're any specialty in the specialty courts. It is a gimmick. A law license is not a license to diagnose or treat. You need to have the appropriate expert, not a police officer diagnosing, not a judge trying to. First, you would have to fund those experts, and there's no such funding currently.
All right, 1 minute rebuttal for you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Like it or not, law enforcement officers are the current first responders. And until we have a better system in place, we must support them under our current system. The money I hope in the future will come. Right now it won't. It isn't. But at this moment.
All right. Next question, Ms. Johnson gets it first. Reduce those costs for indigent defense.
Some of the indigent defense, every county must embrace to get those and control include employee turnover. Every few months. Attorneys that are appointed to represent of a case, and the next time they come to the court, you've got somebody else in place. I see as problematic. Secondly, that we try 3 times the state average. There's a reason. We need to do a better job of collaborating to reduce those costs. It's not necessary.
All right, I'll repeat the question. How do we reduce those costs?
For 2018 is $1,100,000 for CPS, that goes for the Attorney General's Court, goes for juvenile, misdemeanor, and my office is given 1 or less resets. For resets. That's a delay. Operate with the resources that you're given. Tax revenues are down. Responsive to that, they say, Steve, can you get the cut $132,000 out of my a prosecutor within 30 days of passing the bar for 6 months. So 9 months after they're hired, they have to start paying probably more than you do in your mortgage. Now, if you're bidding, that doesn't seem better. You can't pay for a new car, maybe a suit. You can't do anything but pay rent in an apartment. Now, the big they use us as a finishing school. Fort Bend County, for example, in 18 months hired 33% of my attorneys. Now, I'm not going to begrudge somebody of success and their dreams. And I think Fort Bend County is doing a smart thing. When you've worked in my office for 9 months, you've tried cases, you're a good prosecutor, you're experienced. How is she going to reduce that unless she hires people who don't want to progress or can't progress?
All right, 1 minute rebuttal.
Nearly 3 dozen assistant district and 21 assistant practicing criminal law and go to Fort Bend with local ties that probably a shared vision with you. So I respect. Feel that their turnover rate, lack of consistent. Yes, I do request reset.
Rebuttal, Mr. Tyler.
You can go and get the names of everybody that worked there. They work over at Fort Bend County. They work. It's not about feelings, it's about resources. And they come away with reduce the crime. Was it comfortable for defendants? No, but that was by design. Again, if a person wishes to behavior or take their criminal activities somewhere else, that's what a prosecutor does. Enforces the law, protects.
Next question, Mr. Tyler starts first. How effective was your office's use of forfeiture funds to study the operations of the Regional Juvenile Justice Center? And what do you think of
had good operation, and I think that continues now. Now, I used approximately 140 from the narcotics through your jurisdiction. Those are discretionary funds that my office can utilize. In fact, we do. We pay 100% of operating costs and 13% of payroll out of it. We paid for that study. Why? Because the commissioners asked me several questions, which I am bound by law to respond to. Out of Austin, can we set budgets and get involved in the reimbursement rate? What you had was a 72-bed. You were subsidizing Dallas, Harris, San Antonio, and Williamson County. Over the years, you had spent $24 million. It gave information to the commissioner more than compensated for the cost. To go. The county's engineer and architect said the juvenile board has to understand harmed by smoke could have been banked. Made this
DA Justice Center?
Meeting with the results of the consultants that were hired by Mr. Tyler said that they just accumulated from the resources that were already available. Our juvenile justice nationally. I don't want to speculate about what the circumstances were that led did an open records request to get the scope of that study, and Mr. Tyler declined to comply with that request. Use of forfeiture funds, but they just said that they weren't going to arbitrate that argument within our county. The rates for daily rates were already on the horizon to be raised, so it's disingenuous for Mr. Tyler to act as if that study led to that. The study was a peripheral use of time and resources that I don't think was necessary, and I continue to believe in the center and look forward to collaborating with them more extensively in the future.
One minute rebuttal.
Again, you don't get to make up your facts. You have a commissioner that'll talk just after me, and I'm sure that question will be put to him. Every commissioner said it was useful. Every commissioner said it was useful. Now, she says they were going to fix it. They hadn't since it was built. And you remember in social media and the sky is falling and all the hyperbole, the tone and the tenor was Commissioners Court cannot have budget authority over us. Commissioners Court cannot influence us on the rates. And furthermore, we don't care what the engineer or the architect says. We believe it's safe because a fire marshal checked the box. There was no firewall. There was no fire door. There was no smoke evacuation system. There was no contiguous fire retardant system throughout the building. Don't believe me, believe the engineer, believe the architect, and believe your commissioners. And you can go back, and it was on video. You don't get to make it up. Was it efficient use? You ask me, bankruptcy or $140,000 taken from criminals? Every year since then, we have saved more than $140,000. Sounds effective and efficient to me.
All right. 1 minute rebuttal for you, Mr.
The local fire marshal, the state fire marshal, said the facility was safe. Obviously, we had some competing experts that had differing opinions, but the fact of the matter is, any center, whether it's a county jail or a juvenile detention center, has fixed operating costs. Those costs are going to be present whether or not we have out-of-county participants in the program or not. The Juvenile Justice Center has done a good job of offsetting costs that Victoria County would incur one way or the other. Again, we have a top-notch facility, recognized internationally, and the only person that's making you think the sky is falling is right across the table.
All right, we'll move to the final question before closing statements. And again, want to thank everybody here for coming. The final question is for Ms. Johnson. First, Mr. Tyler indicted 4 city officials on perjury charges that later were thrown out by a judge and then dropped by a special prosecutor. How much did this highly publicized 8-year-old case factor into voters' decision-making in the March 6th primary election?
Well, certainly there's not specific data that I can refer to. I can only talk to you about anecdotal data. The citizens of this community are tired of what they perceive as vindictive prosecution, period. We incurred a lot of public costs and a lot of time and unnecessary grief going after people that ultimately were not convicted in this county by people, an outside judge and an outside prosecutor that took a fresh look at that situation, had no dog in the fight whatsoever, and decided there was nothing there. And so I respectfully submit to you that it's still fresh on people's minds. I'm going door to door visiting with folks, introducing myself, asking for their support, and they're still bringing it up. So that's all I can tell you about that.
Okay. Same question for Mr. Tyler. You indicted 4 city officials on perjury charges that later were thrown out by a judge and then dropped by a special prosecutor. How much did this highly publicized 8-year-old case factor into voters' decision-making in the March 6th primary election?
Okay, well, first, your facts are wrong. What was prosecuted by a special prosecutor was Mike Ratcliffe, who was represented by my adversary and her husband. There was a dismissal from a district judge on the other cases, so that's quite a bit different. What you had was an investigation which was interfered into. If you remember, it went to trial, then there was a mistrial. Council member Hagan had a sworn affidavit, never saw the light of day. There's also a lot of stuff in grand jury that never saw the light of day. The grand jury is made up of citizens just like you, your neighbors. They found probable cause. Now, who has a dog in the fight might be who lived in the community and knew Mike Ratcliffe and knew what he was doing. He was reelected 3 terms. Who was the DA? And who represented him when he had the charges against him? Now, I might add, that was the first term. We are now completing the 3rd term. This has been an issue before the voters before. How much does it have to do with anything? As much as Ms. Johnson and her father wants to make it. But you had a problem. You had a sheriff who was accused of having sex with underage kids and people in the jail. You had John Slinger with DPS-CID who attempted an investigation. And if you recall from the public documents, You had a chief of police that interfered with that investigation, telling the key witness that he would be killed by myself or John Slinger. All that's in the public record. Do you believe that that might be an interference with an investigation? If you run the witnesses off? And who had a dog in the fight? Who represented the defendant? Thank you.
All right, time for a 1 minute rebuttal.
Mr. Tyler, as you well know, the code of ethics that we all practice, and there are limits some of the things that I can say about that case, because I did indeed represent Mr. Ratcliffe along with my father, not my husband. Led to the involvement of city officials. The problem and the perceived. So let's be real clear about that. City officials in front of the grand jury respect and an outside judge after a great deal of public fund.
You don't. Ratcliffe was put on in a nursing home. You don't get to make it up. And most of that is, and you can ask him.
Of a sexual offense crime, and so it is a fresh set of outside, a very respected police lieutenant, eyes without a dog in the fight, said there's nothing here, and we spent here first time, and Mr. Tyler has shown us over.
All right, thank you. Thank you again. Each gets a minute, and we're.
Gentlemen, I'm a hometown girl. Problematic issues with our criminal district attorney. Mr. Tyler has done, I just respectfully disagree. Ego will never play a part in my office, but I will make common sense decisions. Thank you for voting.
If you go to the, it's there, questionnaire by the is the ACLU plan. Eyes, no map. Generations. No map. They talked about ethics. I want you to know that there are 3 ethics decisions. It all indicates that you cannot